The stagecoach pulled away from Ruby Preston in a cloud of dust and broken promises, leaving her standing alone on the trail with her trunk at her feet, and the afternoon sun beating down on her shoulders like judgment itself. She had known something was wrong the moment the driver asked everyone to step down at the noon stop. They were somewhere between Socorro and Springerville in the New Mexico territory, and the July heat of 1883 made the desert shimmer like water. The other passengers had stretched their legs, grateful for the chance to ease their cramped muscles, but Ruby had felt a knot of dread forming in her stomach as she watched the driver and his assistant conferring in low voices while eyeing the rear axle of the coach. "Axle's cracked," the driver announced, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. He was a leathery man named Horace with eyes like chips of flint. "We cannot carry the full load to Springerville. Someone's got to wait here for the next coach through." Ruby had watched the other passengers exchange nervous glances. There were 5 of them total. An elderly gentleman traveling to visit his daughter, a thin woman in widow's weeds, a prosperous-looking merchant, and a young married couple. Ruby was the only one traveling alone, the only one without someone to vouch for her or protest on her behalf. "Miss Preston," Horace had said, not quite meeting her eyes, "you are carrying the heaviest luggage and, well, you are a woman of considerable substance yourself. For the safety of the other passengers and the coach, I am going to have to ask you to wait here for the next stage." The words hit her like a physical blow. A woman of considerable substance. She knew what he meant. At 23 years old and carrying more weight than society deemed acceptable for a lady, Ruby had heard every variation of the insult her entire life. But this was the first time it had left her stranded in the middle of the desert. How long until the next coach? She had asked, trying to keep her voice steady. 3 days, maybe 4. 4 days. I cannot wait here for 4 days. There is nothing here but scrub, brush, and rattlesnakes. Should have thought about that before packing so heavy, Horace muttered, already turning away. Or before eating so many biscuits. The elderly gentleman had looked uncomfortable. "Now see here, this is not right. Perhaps we could redistribute the luggage somehow," but the merchant had cut him off. "I have important business in Springerville. We cannot risk the axle breaking completely because someone refuses to accept reality." The widow had said nothing, just clutched her black reticule tighter. The young couple had looked away, the wife whispering urgently to her husband, who shook his head firmly. And so Ruby had stood there, watching as they loaded everyone else back into the coach. The elderly gentleman had pressed a canteen of water into her hands and whispered an apology. The driver had left her trunk beside the road, along with a small amount of provisions wrapped in cloth. "Stay close to the trail," Horace had said gruffly. "Next coach will pick you up. Probably. That single word echoed in Ruby's mind as the stagecoach rolled away, taking with it her paid fare, her dignity, and her hope of reaching her new position as a schoolteacher in Springerville before the term started. She stood there for a long time after the dust settled, fighting back tears. She would not cry. She had not cried when her mother died 2 years ago, leaving her alone in the world. She had not cried when her uncle sold the family house in Philadelphia and told her she needed to make her own way. She had not cried through the long journey west, enduring the stares and whispers. She would not cry now. Instead, Ruby looked around, taking stock of her situation with the practicality that had gotten her through 23 difficult years. The trail stretched in both directions, a pale ribbon through the scrubland. To the north, she could see the distant shapes of mountains. To the south, the land rolled away in waves of brown and gold. There were no buildings in sight, no signs of civilization except the wheel ruts in the dirt. She had water, thanks to the elderly gentleman. She had a small amount of food, dried meat and hard bread. She had the clothes in her trunk, though those would not help her much out here. What she did not have was shelter, or a weapon, or any real hope of surviving if something went wrong. Ruby sat down on her trunk and took a small sip of water, rationing it carefully. The sun was past its peak, but still blazing hot. She would need to find some shade soon, though there was precious little to be found. A few scraggly bushes dotted the landscape, casting shadows no bigger than dinner plates. She was considering whether to drag her trunk toward a slightly larger clump of vegetation when she heard it, the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the north. Ruby stood quickly, her heart hammering. Out here, a stranger could be salvation or danger, and there was no way to know which until it was too late. The rider came into view, and Ruby's first thought was that he looked like he had been carved from the same hard material as the land itself. He sat tall in the saddle, a man in his mid-20s with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that touched his collar beneath a dusty brown hat. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy: denim pants, a faded blue shirt, worn leather vest, and boots that had seen considerable use. A bandana was tied around his neck, and she could see a rifle in a scabbard on his saddle. He slowed his horse as he approached, his eyes taking in the scene. A woman alone with a trunk, no coach in sight. His expression was hard to read, shadowed as it was by his hat brim, but his posture suggested caution rather than threat. "Miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. His voice was deeper than she expected, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent time in Texas or perhaps further south. "You look like you have found yourself in a difficult situation." Ruby lifted her chin, determined not to show weakness. "The stagecoach had mechanical difficulties. They asked me to wait for the next one." The cowboy's eyes narrowed slightly. He looked down the trail where the coach had obviously gone, then back at Ruby and her trunk. "They left you here alone. As I said, mechanical difficulties." He dismounted in one smooth motion and took a few steps closer, though he kept a respectful distance. Up close, Ruby could see that his eyes were a surprising shade of light brown, almost amber in the bright sunlight. His face was lean and angular, with a few days' worth of dark stubble on his jaw. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow, white against his tanned skin. "Vernon Edwards," he said, introducing himself with another slight tip of his hat. "I work for the Double Diamond Ranch about 15 miles north of here. And unless I miss my guess, that stagecoach left you behind because they deemed you too heavy for their cracked axle." Ruby felt heat rise in her cheeks, and it had nothing to do with the desert sun. "I fail to see how that is any of your concern, Mr. Edwards." "It is my concern because I just passed that coach about 5 miles back, and I heard what the driver was telling folks at the noon station before they left. He was laughing about it." Vernon's jaw tightened. Seemed to think it was funny, leaving a woman alone in the desert. The shame Ruby had been holding back threatened to overwhelm her. She turned away, blinking hard. "Well, you have seen the spectacle now. You can ride on and tell your friends about the fat woman stranded on the trail. I am sure it will make an amusing story over dinner." "I did not stop to mock you," Vernon said quietly. "I stopped because leaving someone alone out here is as good as murder, and I was raised better than that." Ruby turned back to him, surprised by the anger in his voice, but his anger did not seem directed at her. He was looking down the trail again, and his expression was hard. "The next coach will come," Ruby said, though she heard the uncertainty in her own voice. "In 3 or 4 days, maybe. And that is 3 or 4 days alone in the heat with limited water and no shelter. At night, the temperature drops fast and there are animals out here that would be happy to find an easy meal. Rattlesnakes, coyotes, maybe a mountain lion if you are really unlucky. He looked back at her. You would not last 2 days. Then what do you suggest? I can hardly walk to Springerville. No, Vernon agreed, but my horse can carry 2. Ruby stared at him. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious. Springerville is where you are headed, right? It is about 30 miles from here. We could make it before nightfall if we leave soon. My horse is strong. He can manage the weight. I am not asking for charity, Mr. Edwards, and I am certainly not climbing onto a horse with a strange man and riding off into the desert. Vernon's expression softened slightly. I understand your concern, Miss Preston. How do you know my name? I heard the driver using it. Look, I know you have no reason to trust me, but consider your options. You can stay here and hope that coach comes through in a few days and hope nothing bad happens to you in the meantime. Or you can let me help you get to Springerville safely. I give you my word as a gentleman that I will not harm you or let any harm come to you. Ruby wanted to argue, but the practical part of her brain was already calculating the odds. Vernon was right about her chances of surviving alone out here. She had perhaps 2 days' worth of water if she was very careful. The heat during the day and the cold at night would sap her strength. And she had no weapon, no way to defend herself against animals or worse. But climbing onto a horse with a stranger was its own kind of risk. Vernon Edwards could be anyone, could want anything. Just because he had a kind face and spoke politely did not mean she would be safe with him. As if reading her thoughts, Vernon reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small leather wallet. He opened it and showed her a badge. I am a deputy sheriff, part-time. Mostly I work cattle, but Sheriff Martinez in Springerville deputized me, and a few other ranch hands to help keep the peace in the territory. You can verify that when we get to town if you want. The badge looked real enough, though Ruby knew badges could be stolen or faked. Still, it was something. And the mention of Sheriff Martinez and Springerville suggested that Vernon's story could be checked. My trunk, Ruby said, wavering. It has everything I own in it. We cannot take the trunk, not if we want to make good time. But I can mark this spot and come back for it tomorrow with a wagon. I promise I will get your belongings to you safely. Ruby looked at her trunk, at the dusty trail, at the vast, empty landscape surrounding them. She looked at Vernon, who stood patiently waiting for her decision, his hat in his hands now and his expression open and honest. She had spent her whole life being careful, being proper, following every rule society laid down for women like her. And where had it gotten her? Stranded in the desert, abandoned by people who could not see past her appearance to the human being beneath. Vernon Edwards was offering her a choice. Maybe not a safe choice, maybe not a wise choice, but a choice nonetheless. She could accept his help and risk whatever consequences came with it, or she could stay here and face certain suffering, possible death. All right, Ruby said finally. I will accept your help. But I want it understood that if you give me any reason to doubt your intentions, I will find a way to make you regret it, badge or no badge. A slight smile crossed Vernon's face, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his stern features, making him look younger and considerably more approachable. Duly noted, Miss Preston. Now we should get moving. I want to get as many miles behind us as possible before the sun starts setting. He helped her gather a few items from her trunk. A shawl, a change of clothes wrapped in paper, her small amount of money and documents, and a book of poetry that had been her mother's. These he secured in his saddlebags. Then he used rocks to mark the location of the trunk, piling them in a distinctive pattern that could be easily spotted from the trail. Ready? He asked, swinging back up into the saddle with easy grace. Ruby looked at the horse dubiously. It was a large bay gelding, sturdy-looking but also intimidating to someone who had limited experience with horses. I should tell you, I have not ridden much, hardly at all actually. That is all right. You will ride behind me. Just hold on and my horse will do the rest. His name is Copper, and he is the most reliable animal I have ever known. Vernon extended his hand down to her. Ruby took a deep breath, gripped his hand, and was surprised by the strength in his arm as he helped pull her up. She managed to get her foot in the stirrup he had freed for her and swung her leg over, settling behind the saddle on the horse's broad back. "Put your arms around my waist and hold on tight," Vernon instructed. "Do not be shy about it. If you fall off, we both have problems." Ruby hesitated for only a moment before wrapping her arms around his waist. She could feel the solid warmth of him through his shirt, could smell the scent of leather and horse and something else, maybe soap or just sun-warmed skin. It was strange and intimate and terrifying, being this close to a man she did not know. "Comfortable?" Vernon asked. "Not remotely, but I will survive." She felt more than heard his quiet laugh. Then he clicked his tongue and Copper started forward at an easy walk. Ruby tightened her grip instinctively, and Vernon did not comment on it, just kept the horse moving at a steady pace. They rode in silence for the first hour. Ruby was too focused on staying mounted to make conversation, and Vernon seemed content to let her adjust. The motion of the horse was strange, rolling and rhythmic, and she found herself trying to move with it rather than against it. The landscape rolled past them, mile after mile of scrubland broken by the occasional outcropping of red rock or stunted tree. The sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Despite the circumstances, despite everything, Ruby had to admit there was a harsh beauty to this land. "You are doing well," Vernon said after a while, breaking the silence. "Most folks who are not used to riding are pretty uncomfortable by now." "Who says I am not uncomfortable?" "Fair point. But you have not complained, and you have not fallen off. That puts you ahead of some people I have known." "I imagine complaining would not improve the situation." "Probably not, but you would be surprised how many people feel compelled to try." Ruby found herself almost smiling. "Where are you from originally, Mr. Edwards? Your accent is not quite New Mexico. Call me Vernon, please." "Mr. Edwards makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and sitting in an office somewhere. And you are right, I am not from around here originally. I grew up in Texas, near Austin. My family had a small ranch there, came to New Mexico about 3 years ago looking for work." "Do you miss Texas?" Vernon was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes, but there was nothing left for me there after my parents passed. My older brother got the ranch, which was as it should be. I needed to make my own way." "I understand that," Ruby said quietly. "I lost my mother 2 years ago. My father died when I was young. After my mother passed, my uncle made it clear I was no longer welcome in Philadelphia. He helped me secure the teaching position in Springerville, but mostly because it got me out of his house. That is a hard thing, not being wanted by family." "Yes." They rode on. The sun sank lower and the heat began to ease slightly. Vernon kept Copper to a steady pace, not pushing hard but not dawdling either. He seemed to know the trail well, pointing out landmarks occasionally. A distinctive rock formation, a dry creek bed, the ruins of an old adobe structure that might have been a homestead once. "How did you become a deputy?" Ruby asked eventually. "I happened to be in Springerville when a couple of drifters tried to rob the bank. Helped the sheriff stop them. He offered me the badge as a thank you, said it might come in handy if I ever needed legal authority for anything. It does not pay anything, but I have the authority to act if I see someone breaking the law or if someone needs help." "Is that what I am? Someone who needs help?" Vernon turned his head slightly, and she could see his profile against the darkening sky. You are someone who got dealt an unfair hand through no fault of your own. Nothing wrong with accepting help when it is offered honestly. Ruby thought about that. She had spent so much of her life trying to prove she did not need help, that she could manage on her own despite what people thought of her. Pride, her mother had sometimes called it, though not unkindly. The strength to stand alone. But maybe there was also strength in knowing when to accept a hand extended in friendship. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming back, for helping me. You are welcome." The sky had turned from orange to deep purple by the time Vernon announced they were about halfway to Springerville. They stopped briefly to rest Copper and allow Ruby to stretch her legs. She was stiff and sore from riding, her thighs and back aching from the unaccustomed position, but she was determined not to complain. Vernon offered her water from a second canteen he carried and some strips of dried beef. They ate standing there in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of the desert coming to life around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and Ruby shivered despite the lingering warmth in the air. "You are safe," Vernon said, noticing her reaction. "They will not come near us." "How can you be so sure?" "Because Copper will warn us if anything gets too close, and because I have this." He patted the rifle still secured to his saddle. "But honestly, most animals out here want nothing to do with humans. They are more afraid of us than we are of them." "I am not entirely sure about that," Ruby admitted, and Vernon smiled. They mounted up again, and this time Ruby found it a bit easier to settle into position behind him. Her arms went around his waist with less hesitation, and she allowed herself to lean against his back slightly, taking comfort in his solid presence. "Tell me about being a teacher," Vernon said as they rode through the deepening night. "What made you choose that profession?" "My mother was a teacher. She taught me to read when I was very young, and I loved it from the start. The way words could open up entire worlds, could teach you things and take you places you had never been. When she got sick, she made me promise I would continue teaching, that I would help other children discover what she had shown me. She sounds like she was a good woman. She was the best, patient and kind and endlessly curious about everything. She never treated me like I was less than anyone else because of how I looked. She said beauty came in all shapes and sizes, and the only thing that really mattered was the content of a person's character." "Smart woman," Vernon said. "My mother used to say something similar. She said you could always tell the measure of a person by how they treated those who could do nothing for them. I like that. She would have liked you, I think." The comment warmed Ruby more than it probably should have. They continued riding, and she found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Vernon had a calm, steady presence that was reassuring. He pointed out constellations as the stars emerged in the vast sky above them, naming them in English and sometimes in Spanish, which he had learned from the ranch hands he worked with. "There is Orion," he said, pointing to a distinctive pattern of stars. "And there is the Big Dipper, though some folks call it the Drinking Gourd. Slaves used to follow it north to freedom before the war, or so I was told." "Did you fight in the war?" Ruby asked, then immediately regretted it. The Civil War had ended 18 years ago, and Vernon would have been just a child at the time. "Too young for that," he confirmed. "But my father did. He did not talk about it much, except to say that war was hell and he hoped his sons would never have to see one. I cannot imagine what it must have been like. I hope we never have to find out." They fell into a comfortable silence after that, and Ruby found herself growing drowsy despite the discomfort of riding. The rocking motion of the horse, the warmth of Vernon's back, the quiet sounds of the night all combined to make her eyelids heavy. "Almost there," Vernon said softly, and Ruby jerked awake, not even realizing she had been dozing. "See those lights ahead? That is Springerville." Ruby peered around Vernon's shoulder and saw lights twinkling in the distance, a small cluster of civilization in the vast darkness. Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by apprehension. She was about to arrive in her new home under highly unusual circumstances, and she would need to explain what had happened to the school board and to whoever else asked. As if sensing her worry, Vernon said, "Do not worry about what people will think. Sheriff Martinez knows me, and he will vouch for your story. The school board might be concerned, but they cannot fault you for circumstances beyond your control." "You do not know the school board," Ruby muttered, but she appreciated the reassurance nonetheless. They rode into Springerville as the church bells were ringing 9 o'clock. The town was larger than Ruby had expected, with a main street lined with businesses and several cross streets branching off into residential areas. Even at this hour, there were people out, mostly men heading to or from the saloons, but also a few respectable-looking couples taking evening strolls. Vernon guided Copper toward a building with a sign reading Sheriff's Office and dismounted, then helped Ruby down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, stiff and sore from hours of riding, but she managed to stay upright through sheer force of will. "Wait here a moment," Vernon said, and went inside. Ruby stood there, very aware of how she must look. Dusty, disheveled, arriving in town on the back of a cowboy's horse long after dark. She could see curious glances from passers-by, could imagine what they were thinking. Vernon emerged a moment later with another man, older and wearing a sheriff's badge prominently on his vest. He was a stocky man with graying hair and a thick mustache, his weathered face suggesting years spent in the sun. "Miss Preston," he said, his voice carrying a slight Spanish accent. "I am Sheriff Gabriel Martinez. Vernon has told me what happened to you on the trail. Please accept my apologies on behalf of Springerville and the territory. You were treated shamefully." The kindness in his voice nearly undid Ruby's composure. "Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate your concern. Vernon tells me you are the new school teacher. The school board has been expecting you. I should send word to them that you have arrived, though perhaps you would like to rest first. The hotel is just down the street, and I am sure they can provide you with a room. I do not want to impose." "It is not an imposition, Miss Preston. It is common decency." Sheriff Martinez looked at Vernon. "Can you escort her to the hotel and make sure she gets settled? I will speak with the school board in the morning and explain the situation." "Of course," Vernon said. The sheriff nodded to both of them and went back inside his office. Vernon gathered Ruby's small bundle of belongings from his saddlebag and offered her his arm. "The hotel is this way. It is nothing fancy, but it is clean, and the proprietor is a decent woman named Mrs. Chen. She came out from California about 10 years ago and has been running the place ever since." They walked down the main street together, and Ruby was intensely aware of every eye that turned their way. Vernon seemed unfazed, nodding greetings to people they passed and ignoring the curious stares. The hotel was a 2-story wooden building with a neat sign and welcoming lights in the windows. Inside, a small woman with Chinese features and silver-streaked black hair looked up from the desk where she had been reading. "Vernon," she said, smiling, "it has been a while since I saw you in town." "Good evening, Mrs. Chen. This is Miss Ruby Preston, the new schoolteacher. She has had a difficult journey and needs a room for the night. Can you help her?" Mrs. Chen's sharp eyes took in Ruby's appearance, and understanding flashed across her face. "Of course. We have a lovely room on the 2nd floor. Come with me, dear." Vernon handed Ruby's belongings to Mrs. Chen, then turned to Ruby. "I should go. I need to get Copper settled at the stable and report back to the ranch." But I will come back tomorrow morning with a wagon to retrieve your trunk, and I will make sure it gets to you safely." "Vernon," Ruby started, not sure what she wanted to say. Thank you seemed inadequate for what he had done for her. "Get some rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow is a new day, and things will look better in the morning." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Ruby feeling strangely bereft. "Come along, dear," Mrs. Chen said, already heading for the stairs. "Let us get you settled. You look exhausted." The room was small but comfortable, with a bed covered in a clean quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window overlooking the main street. Mrs. Chen showed her where everything was, promised to have bath water brought up in the morning, and tactfully did not ask any questions about how Ruby had arrived in town. After Mrs. Chen left, Ruby sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to process everything that had happened. She had been abandoned by the stagecoach, rescued by a stranger, and carried 30 miles through the desert to arrive in a town where she knew no one and had no clear idea of what came next. But she was alive, and she was safe, and that was largely thanks to Vernon Edwards. She thought about his steady presence during the ride, his quiet kindness, his refusal to treat her as less than human because of her appearance. He had seen someone who needed help and had offered it without hesitation or expectation of reward. Ruby stood and went to the window, looking out at the darkened street below. Somewhere out there, Vernon was settling his horse and preparing to ride back to his ranch. She wondered if she would see him again and was surprised by how much she hoped the answer was yes. She slept poorly that night, her body aching from the long ride and her mind spinning with worries about meeting the school board and starting her new position. But when she woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sounds of the town coming to life below, she felt a spark of determination. She had survived yesterday. She would survive today and whatever came after. Mrs. Chen was as good as her word, arranging for bath water to be brought up along with breakfast. Ruby washed away the dust of the trail and changed into the fresh clothes she had salvaged from her trunk, a simple blue dress that was practical and professional. She pinned up her brown hair, studied her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand, and decided she looked as presentable as possible under the circumstances. She was finishing her breakfast of eggs and toast when there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Sheriff Martinez standing there with a tall, thin woman whose graying hair was pulled back in a severe bun. "Good morning, Miss Preston," the sheriff said. "This is Mrs. Eleanor Harper. She is the head of the Springerville School Board." Ruby's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression calm and invited them in. Mrs. Harper's eyes swept over Ruby with an appraising look that managed to be both thorough and dismissive. "Miss Preston, we had expected you on the evening stage yesterday. When you did not arrive, we were concerned." Ruby explained what had happened, keeping her tone even and factual. She did not mention how humiliated she had felt, did not dwell on the injustice of being left behind. She simply stated the facts: the cracked axle, the driver's decision, Vernon's rescue. Mrs. Harper's lips pressed into a thin line. "I see. And this cowboy who brought you here, you spent several hours alone with him in the desert. He saved my life," Ruby said firmly. "I would not be here otherwise. Nevertheless, it puts us in an awkward position. The parents of Springerville expect their children's teacher to be above reproach, to model proper behavior and moral rectitude. Arriving in town late at night on the back of a man's horse is hardly conducive to such a reputation." Ruby felt anger flaring hot in her chest. She had done nothing wrong, and yet here was this woman suggesting she had somehow compromised herself by accepting help when she needed it. "With respect, Mrs. Harper," Sheriff Martinez interjected before Ruby could respond. Miss Preston's reputation should not suffer because she was the victim of cruel treatment and had to accept help from a good man who stopped to assist someone in need. Vernon Edwards is a deputy and a man of unimpeachable character. If anyone questions Miss Preston's behavior, they will answer to me. Mrs. Harper looked taken aback by the sheriff's firm tone. She studied Ruby for another long moment, and Ruby met her gaze steadily, refusing to look away or show weakness. "Very well," Mrs. Harper said finally. "You may begin your duties as planned. School starts next Monday, which gives you 5 days to prepare. The schoolhouse is at the end of Oak Street. I will show you there this afternoon so you can begin familiarizing yourself with the facility. Your lodgings are in the small cottage behind the schoolhouse. It is not much, but it is clean and adequate for your needs." "Thank you," Ruby said, though she could hear the lack of warmth in Mrs. Harper's voice. She had passed some kind of test, but she had not won this woman over. That would take time and proof of her teaching abilities. After Mrs. Harper and the sheriff left, Ruby sat down heavily on the bed. She had a job and she had lodging. That was more than she had been sure of last night. It was a start. There was another knock at the door around mid-morning, and this time when Ruby opened it, she found Vernon standing there, hat in hand, looking scrubbed and considerably cleaner than he had last night. "Good morning," he said, and Ruby felt an unexpected flutter in her chest at the sight of him. In the harsh light of day, she could see him more clearly. The strong lines of his face, the warmth in those amber eyes, the way a slight smile played at the corners of his mouth when he saw her. "Good morning," she replied, suddenly very aware of her appearance and hoping she looked presentable. "I came to let you know I am about to head out to retrieve your trunk. I wanted to make sure I knew where to bring it. Mrs. Harper says I will be staying in a cottage behind the schoolhouse, though I have not seen it yet. I know the place. It is a good little cottage, actually. The last teacher kept it nice. I will bring your trunk there this afternoon if that works for you." "That would be wonderful. Thank you, Vernon. I do not know how I can repay you for everything you have done." "No repayment necessary," he said firmly. "I am just glad I came along when I did." He hesitated, then added, "If you need anything else while you are settling in, the Double Diamond Ranch is about an hour's ride north of town. Anyone can give you directions, or you can leave word with Sheriff Martinez and he can get a message to me." "I will remember that." He settled his hat back on his head and turned to go, then paused. "Miss Preston, Ruby." "Yes. Do not let people like Mrs. Harper make you feel less than you are. You are brave and strong, and this town is lucky to have you as their teacher." Before Ruby could respond, he was gone, his boots echoing on the wooden stairs as he descended. Ruby spent the rest of the morning exploring Springerville, getting her bearings in her new home. The town was prosperous by frontier standards, with a main street that boasted a general store, a bank, 2 saloons, a restaurant, a blacksmith, and various other businesses. There was a small church at one end of town and the schoolhouse at the other, both painted white and kept in good repair. Mrs. Harper arrived at the hotel after lunch to show Ruby to the schoolhouse and her new home. The schoolhouse was a single large room with rows of desks, a blackboard at the front, and windows that let in plenty of light. It was clean and well-maintained, with books lining shelves along one wall and maps hanging on another. The cottage behind it was small, consisting of just 2 rooms, a main living area with a tiny kitchen and a bedroom barely large enough for the bed and wardrobe it contained. But it was, as Mrs. Harper had said, clean and adequate. There was even a small covered porch where Ruby could sit in the evenings. "School begins at 8 o'clock sharp each weekday," Mrs. Harper informed her. "You will have students ranging from age 6 to 14. The older children help with the younger ones. We expect you to teach reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and geography at a minimum. Comportment and moral instruction are also essential. I understand. The school board meets once a month. You will be expected to provide a report on the student's progress. Your salary is $30 a month, paid on the first of each month. Firewood for heating will be provided, as will basic supplies like chalk and slates, though you may need to supplement from your own funds for anything extra. Ruby nodded, taking mental notes. $30 a month was not generous, but it was enough to live on if she was careful. Mrs. Harper left her with a key to both the schoolhouse and the cottage, and Ruby spent the afternoon exploring her new domain. She reviewed the books available, planned tentative lessons, and tried to imagine the room filled with children's voices. She was sweeping the floor when she heard a wagon pull up outside. Ruby went to the door and found Vernon unloading her trunk from the back of a buckboard wagon. He carried it inside as if it weighed nothing, setting it down in the bedroom. Everything was still there, he reported. No one had disturbed it. Thank you so much, I was worried. Vernon looked around the small cottage, his eyes taking in the sparse furnishings and bare walls. It is not much, is it? It is more than some people have, and it is mine, at least for now. That counts for something, he nodded, understanding in his expression. If you need anything, there is a general store on Main Street. Owner's name is Mr. Peterson. He is fair and honest, will not try to cheat you. I will remember that. They stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between them but not uncomfortable. Ruby found herself memorizing his features, knowing he would leave soon and uncertain when she might see him again. I should get back, Vernon said finally. We are in the middle of a big cattle drive at the ranch and they need all hands. Of course, I have taken up enough of your time already. Vernon turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Ruby, would it be all right if I came by to visit sometime? I would like to know how you are settling in. Ruby's heart did an unexpected skip. I would like that very much. His smile was warm and genuine. Good. I will see you soon then. After he left, Ruby stood on her small porch and watched the wagon disappear down the street. She felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, something warm and hopeful. She barely knew Vernon Edwards, but he had shown her more kindness in one day than most people had shown her in years. And she found herself wanting to know him better, to understand the man behind the quiet strength and gentle manner. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Ruby threw herself into preparing for the school year, organizing the classroom, reviewing materials, and planning lessons. She met a few of the other townspeople, including Mr. Peterson at the general store who, as Vernon had promised, was friendly and helpful. Mrs. Chen stopped by with a basket of goods to help Ruby settle in, refusing to accept payment and telling her that newcomers needed to stick together. Ruby also met some of the parents whose children would be in her class. Most were polite if reserved, clearly waiting to see what kind of teacher she would be before forming opinions. A few were openly skeptical, and Ruby knew she would have to prove herself through her actions. She did not see Vernon, though she found herself looking for him whenever she went into town. She told herself she was being foolish, that he had his own life and work, that one act of kindness did not mean anything more. But she could not quite suppress the hope that he would keep his promise to visit. On Sunday, Ruby attended services at the small church, sitting in the back and trying to ignore the curious stares. The minister, Reverend Thompson, was a kind-faced man in his 50s who preached a sermon about loving your neighbor and treating strangers with kindness. Ruby wondered if word of her arrival had reached him and if the sermon was intentionally pointed. After the service, several people introduced themselves, including a young woman named Sarah Miller who taught music lessons in town. "I heard about what happened to you on the trail," Sarah said quietly as they stood outside the church. "That was terrible. I am so glad you made it here safely." "Thank you. Vernon Edwards was very helpful." "Vernon is a good man," Sarah agreed. "He does not come to town much, but everyone who knows him speaks highly of him. You were fortunate he came along when he did." "I know." Sarah hesitated, then said, "If you need a friend here, I hope you will let me know. It can be lonely being a newcomer in a small town. People can be suspicious of outsiders." Ruby felt a rush of gratitude. "I would like that very much. Thank you." They made plans to have tea together later in the week, and Ruby returned to her cottage feeling slightly more settled. She had a job, a home, and now the beginnings of a friendship. Things were starting to come together. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. Ruby was at the schoolhouse by 7 o'clock, her stomach fluttering with nerves. She had taught before, helping her mother with younger students, but this was different. This was her classroom, her responsibility. The children began arriving around 7:45. Some walked by parents and others coming in groups. They ranged from tiny 6-year-olds clutching lunch pails to gangly teenagers who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. Ruby greeted each one at the door, learning names and making mental notes about personalities. By the time she rang the bell at 8 o'clock, she had 23 students sitting at desks, all staring at her with varying degrees of curiosity, suspicion, and open skepticism. Ruby stood at the front of the room, looked at all those young faces, and felt a calm settle over her. This was what she was meant to do. This was her purpose. "Good morning," she said clearly. "My name is Miss Preston, and I am very happy to be your teacher this year. We are going to learn many things together, and I hope we will all grow and discover new ideas and skills. But first, I want to tell you the most important rule in this classroom." She paused, looking at each child in turn. "In this room, every person matters. Every person has value. I do not care if you are the oldest or the youngest, the smartest or the one who struggles most, the richest or the poorest. In this room, we treat each other with respect and kindness. We help each other. We lift each other up, because that is what good people do." Several of the children looked surprised. One of the older boys in the back, a lanky youth with dark hair, raised his hand. "Yes," Ruby said, "my name is Thomas, Miss Preston, and I just want to say that is a good rule. My pa says the same thing." "Your pa sounds like a wise man, Thomas." "Thank you." The day proceeded better than Ruby had dared to hope. The children were typical children, with the usual range of behaviors from the eager students who raised their hands for every question to the ones who stared out the window and had to be gently redirected. But none of them were cruel or deliberately disruptive, and by the end of the day, Ruby felt like she had accomplished something worthwhile. As the last student left, calling out, "Goodbye, Miss Preston," Ruby sank into her chair behind the desk and allowed herself a smile. One day down. Many more to come, but she had made it through the first one. She was cleaning the blackboard when she heard footsteps at the door. She turned, expecting a parent coming to discuss their child, and instead found Vernon standing there, still dusty from the trail and holding his hat in his hands. "Vernon," she said, surprised and pleased, "I did not expect to see you. I hope I am not intruding. I was in town picking up supplies for the ranch and thought I would stop by to see how your first day went." "It went well, I think. The children were wonderful." Vernon smiled. "I am glad to hear it. I told you this town was lucky to have you." Ruby felt warmth spread through her chest. "Would you like to come in? I could make coffee. It is not much, but I have a small stove in the cottage." "I would like that very much." They walked to the cottage together, and Ruby put the kettle on while Vernon sat at the small table. It was strange and wonderful, having someone in her space, sharing this moment with her. "Tell me about your day," Vernon said, and Ruby found herself describing the students, the lessons, the small victories and challenges. Vernon listened attentively, asking questions and laughing at her descriptions of the more colorful children. "You are a natural teacher," he said when she finished. "I can hear the passion in your voice when you talk about it." "It is what I was meant to do," Ruby said simply. "What about you? Tell me about the ranch." Vernon described his work at the Double Diamond, the cattle drives and roundups, the long days and hard work. He spoke about the other ranch hands he worked with, the foreman who was tough but fair, the owner who treated his workers well. "It is a good life," he said. "Hard sometimes, but honest. I like working with my hands, being outside, seeing the results of my labor." They talked until the sun began to set, the conversation flowing easily between them. Ruby learned that Vernon liked to read when he had time, that his favorite food was his mother's apple pie recipe that he still tried to make occasionally with mixed results, that he had a younger sister back in Texas who wrote to him sometimes. Vernon learned that Ruby played the piano though she had not touched one in months, that she had once dreamed of traveling to Europe, but had given up that dream when her mother fell ill, that she loved thunderstorms and the smell of rain on dry earth. When Vernon finally stood to leave, Ruby felt a pang of disappointment. The evening had passed too quickly. "May I visit again?" Vernon asked at the door. "Please do. I would like that very much." He smiled, and Ruby noticed for the first time that he had a small dimple in his left cheek when he smiled fully. "Maybe I could take you to dinner at the restaurant in town sometime, if that would be appropriate." "I think that would be very appropriate, and very nice." After he left, Ruby cleaned up the coffee cups and sat on her porch watching the stars emerge. She had been in Springerville less than a week, but already it was starting to feel like home. And a large part of that was because of the cowboy who had ridden back for her when no one else would. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Ruby taught her students during the day, finding joy in watching them learn and grow. She became friends with Sarah Miller, and the two young women often had tea together on Sunday afternoons after church. Mrs. Chen at the hotel made a point of checking on Ruby regularly, bringing little treats or necessities she thought Ruby might need. And Vernon visited, at first once a week, and then more frequently as autumn settled over New Mexico. He would stop by after work, dusty and tired but always willing to talk about their days. Sometimes he brought small gifts, wild flowers he had found on the trail, a book he thought she might like, fresh vegetables from a ranch hand's garden. They had dinner at the restaurant twice, sitting across from each other at a small table and talking until the proprietor had to gently remind them that he needed to close. They went for walks through town, Vernon always carefully respectful of Ruby's reputation, but clearly enjoying her company as much as she enjoyed his. Ruby found herself thinking about Vernon at odd moments during the day, wondering what he was doing, looking forward to his next visit. She noticed little things about him. The way he always listened carefully when she spoke, the gentle way he treated animals and children, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. For his part, Vernon made no secret of his growing affection. He looked at Ruby with warmth in his eyes, complimented her intelligence and her kindness, told her she was beautiful in a way that made her believe he truly saw her as such. One evening in late October, they were walking along the edge of town, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and orange. The air had a cool edge to it now, a promise of winter to come. "Ruby," Vernon said, stopping and turning to face her, "I need to tell you something." Her heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" "I have grown very fond of you over these past months. More than fond, if I am being honest. I think about you constantly. I look for excuses to come to town just so I can see you. When I am with you, I feel like I am the best version of myself." Ruby felt tears prick at her eyes. "Vernon, I feel the same way. You have been so kind to me, so patient and understanding. You see me, really see me in a way no one else ever has." "I do see you," he said earnestly, taking her hands in his. "I see a woman who is strong and brave and kind. I see someone who was dealt an unfair hand but who faced it with dignity and grace. I see someone who cares about children and teaching and making the world a better place. And yes, I see a beautiful woman, because you are beautiful to me, Ruby. Not despite how you look, but because of who you are, which shines through in everything you do." A tear slid down Ruby's cheek. "No one has ever said anything like that to me before." "Then no one has really looked at you before. Ruby Preston, I am falling in love with you." "Actually, I think I have been falling in love with you since that first day when you stood in the desert refusing to feel sorry for yourself. And I need you to know that if you will let me, I want to court you properly. I want to see if what we have can grow into something permanent." Ruby's heart felt like it might burst. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Vernon, I would like that very much, because I am falling in love with you too." Vernon pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Ruby rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. In that moment, standing in the cool evening air with the man who had saved her in more ways than one, Ruby felt truly happy for the first time in years. Their courtship became official after that evening, and the town of Springerville watched with interest as the cowboy and the schoolteacher grew closer. Some people were skeptical, wondering what a handsome man like Vernon Edwards saw in the heavy-set schoolteacher. But most people, seeing the way Vernon looked at Ruby and the way she glowed in his presence, recognized real affection when they saw it. The school board, led by the stern Mrs. Harper, initially expressed concern about the propriety of their teacher being courted. But Sheriff Martinez, bless him, pointed out that there was nothing improper about two adults of good character spending time together, and that if the board took issue with it, they might find themselves looking for a new teacher, which would not be easy given Ruby's excellent performance. Ruby's students adored Vernon, who sometimes stopped by the schoolhouse to walk Ruby home. He would answer their questions about ranch life and horses, and he once brought Copper to show the children, letting the smaller ones pat the gentle horse's nose. As autumn turned to winter, Ruby and Vernon's relationship deepened. They talked about everything, their hopes and dreams, their fears and disappointments, their beliefs and values. They discovered they wanted the same things from life: a home, a family, a place to belong, the chance to do meaningful work and build something lasting. Vernon was a patient man, never pushing Ruby beyond what she was comfortable with, always respectful of her position in the community. But there were moments, stolen kisses on her porch when no one was watching, the way he held her hand when they walked just outside of town, that made it clear his feelings were deep and genuine. In December, Vernon asked Ruby if she would like to visit the Double Diamond Ranch to see where he lived and worked. Ruby agreed eagerly, curious about this place that was so important to him. They rode out on a crisp Saturday morning, Ruby riding behind Vernon on Copper just like she had that first day. But this time, she was comfortable with the motion of the horse and the nearness of the man she loved. Yes, loved. She could admit it to herself now. The Double Diamond Ranch was larger and more impressive than Ruby had imagined. The main house was a sprawling adobe structure with a red tile roof and covered porches. Beyond it were barns and corrals, bunkhouses for the ranch hands, and pastures that seemed to stretch forever. Vernon introduced her to some of the other men who worked there, a diverse group that included several Mexican vaqueros, an older black man named Joseph, who was the best horse trainer in 3 territories according to Vernon, and a handful of white cowboys of various ages. All of them treated Ruby with respect and friendliness, clearly taking their cue from Vernon. The ranch owner, Mr. Daniel Erickson, was a tall Swede who had come west 20 years earlier and built his ranch from nothing. He and his wife invited Ruby and Vernon to lunch at the main house, and Mrs. Erickson, a kind woman originally from Missouri, immediately took to Ruby. "Vernon has told us so much about you," Mrs. Erickson said as they ate. He could not stop talking about the brave schoolteacher who accepted a difficult situation with such grace. Ruby blushed. "I am not sure about brave. I simply did what I had to do." "That is the definition of bravery," Mr. Erickson said in his slightly accented English. "Doing what must be done even when it is hard. And Vernon tells me you are an excellent teacher. That is important work, teaching the young ones. It is the work I love most." After lunch, Vernon showed Ruby around the ranch, pointing out various features with obvious pride. This was his world, and she could see how much he loved it. The wide open spaces, the honest work, the camaraderie with the other men. "Could you be happy here?" Vernon asked as they stood by a corral, watching horses graze in the winter sunshine. "I mean, not necessarily at this ranch, but this kind of life. It is not easy and it can be lonely. We are far from cities and culture and all the things you might be used to." Ruby thought about it seriously. She had grown up in Philadelphia, a city with theaters and museums and restaurants. But she had also spent the last months in Springerville, a small frontier town, and she had been happier here than she had been in years. "I think I could be very happy," she said carefully. "As long as I could still teach. That is important to me, Vernon. I do not want to give that up." "I would never ask you to," he said immediately. "Your teaching is part of who you are. I would not want you to change that." He hesitated. "But I am getting ahead of myself. I have not even asked the important question yet." "What question is that?" Vernon turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. The winter sun made his amber eyes glow, and Ruby thought she had never seen anyone more handsome in her life. "Ruby Preston, will you marry me?" Ruby's breath caught in her throat. She had hoped, had dreamed, but hearing the actual words made it real in a way that was almost overwhelming. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face now. "Yes, Vernon, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly for the first time. Not a stolen kiss on her porch, but a real kiss that spoke of love and promise and forever. Ruby kissed him back with all the emotion in her heart, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathless and grinning like fools. "I do not have a ring yet," Vernon admitted. "I wanted to ask you first, make sure you would say yes before I spent money on something you might not want." "I do not need a fancy ring," Ruby said. "I just need you." But 2 weeks later, Vernon presented her with a simple gold band set with a small but beautiful diamond. It had belonged to his mother, passed down to him before she died, and Ruby cried when he told her that. "She would have loved you," Vernon said, slipping the ring on Ruby's finger. "She always said I should find a woman with a strong heart and a kind soul. That is exactly what you are." They were married in February of 1884 in the small church in Springerville with half the town in attendance. Sarah Miller played piano for the ceremony, and Mrs. Chen cried openly into a handkerchief. Sheriff Martinez gave Ruby away, having become something of a father figure to her over the months. Even Mrs. Harper attended, and if her smile was a bit tight, at least she was there. Ruby wore a simple white dress that she and Sarah had sewn together, and Vernon wore a new suit that made him look slightly uncomfortable but devastatingly handsome. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, and Vernon kissed her in front of everyone, Ruby felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The reception was held at the hotel, with Mrs. Chen providing food and drink. The ranch hands from the Double Diamond came to town for the celebration, and there was music and dancing and laughter. Ruby danced with Vernon, with Sheriff Martinez, with Mr. Erickson, and even with Thomas, her student who was growing like a weed and already taller than her. "Are you happy?" Vernon asked as they danced, holding her close while the music played around them. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Ruby said honestly. "Sometimes I think about that day on the trail, how alone I felt, how hopeless, and then you came back for me. You saved me, Vernon." "We saved each other," Vernon corrected gently. "You gave me someone to care for, someone to love. You gave me a purpose beyond just working and existing. You made me want to be better, to build a life worth living." Ruby rested her head against his shoulder. "I love you so much." "I love you too, Ruby Edwards." Ruby Edwards. She had a new name now, a new identity. She was no longer Ruby Preston, the unwanted niece, the woman left behind for being too heavy. She was Ruby Edwards, wife and teacher and partner to a good man who saw her true value. They spent their wedding night at the hotel, in the nicest room Mrs. Chen had available. Ruby was nervous, having limited knowledge of what transpired between husband and wife, but Vernon was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Their union was tender and sweet, and afterward, lying in Vernon's arms in the darkness, Ruby felt a completeness she had never known before. The next day, Vernon moved Ruby's belongings from the cottage behind the schoolhouse to a small house he had been renting on the edge of town. It was larger than the cottage, with a real kitchen and a separate bedroom and a small barn out back where Copper could be stabled. "It is not much yet," Vernon said as they unpacked her trunk, the same trunk that had been left on the trail all those months ago. "But we can make it a home together. And someday, maybe we can build our own place, something bigger." "This is perfect," Ruby assured him. "It is more than I ever dreamed of having." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Ruby continued teaching, walking to the schoolhouse each morning while Vernon went to work at the ranch. In the evenings, they would have dinner together, talking about their days, planning for their future, simply enjoying each other's company. Ruby had been worried that married life might change Vernon, that once the courtship was over he might show a different side. But he remained the kind, patient, loving man she had fallen for. He helped with household chores without being asked, brought her small gifts and surprises, told her daily how much he loved her. For Ruby's part, she worked hard to be a good wife. She cooked meals, kept the house clean, and created a warm, welcoming home for them. She also continued her teaching with renewed passion, knowing she had Vernon's full support. Spring came again to New Mexico, bringing with it wildflowers and warm breezes. Ruby finished her first full year of teaching and was asked to return for the next year with Mrs. Harper grudgingly admitting that she had done an excellent job. In April, Ruby realized she was expecting a baby. She told Vernon one evening after dinner, nervous about his reaction. They had not specifically discussed children, though both had assumed they wanted a family eventually. Vernon's face lit up like the sunrise. "A baby? Really, really? Sometime in November, I think." He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, and Ruby clung to him, laughing too. When he set her down, he immediately became serious. "Are you all right? Should you be working?" "Do you need to see the doctor?" "I am fine," Ruby assured him, touched by his concern. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am healthy and strong, but I will need to stop teaching eventually, probably by September." "Whatever you need," Vernon said. "We will figure it out together." The pregnancy progressed normally, and Ruby continued teaching through the end of the school year in June. She arranged for a substitute teacher to take over when the new term started, a young woman from Santa Fe who was eager for the position. As summer turned to fall and Ruby's belly grew round with their child, Vernon became increasingly protective. He insisted on doing all the heavy work around the house, worried constantly about her health, and generally treated her like she might break at any moment. "I am pregnant, not fragile," Ruby told him one evening in October, laughing at his hovering. "Women work until the day they give birth. I can still cook dinner." "I know, but I want to take care of you. Is that so wrong?" "It is not wrong at all," Ruby said, pulling him down for a kiss. "It is actually quite sweet, but you need to trust that I will tell you if I need help." Their daughter was born on a cold night in early November, after a labor that was long but not excessively difficult. Vernon stayed with Ruby the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, offering encouragement and love. When the midwife finally placed their baby girl in Ruby's arms, both new parents cried. "She is perfect," Vernon whispered, looking at the tiny bundle with wonder. "She has your nose." "And your eyes," Ruby said, noting the amber-brown gaze that seemed to look right through her. They named her Victoria Me Edwards, Victoria for Vernon's mother and Me for Ruby's. The baby was healthy and strong, with a lusty cry that suggested a good temperament. Ruby had worried during her pregnancy that she might not be a good mother, that her own difficult childhood might have left her unprepared. But the moment she held Victoria, all those fears melted away. This tiny person was hers to love and protect, and Ruby would move heaven and earth to make sure her daughter never felt unwanted or less than anyone else. Vernon proved to be a devoted father. He would get up in the middle of the night to walk with Victoria when she was fussy, would sing to her in his off-key voice, would stare at her for hours as if she were the most fascinating thing in the world. Ruby often found him holding their daughter and talking to her about everything and nothing, explaining his day or describing the ranch or simply telling her how much he loved her. "She cannot understand you yet," Ruby pointed out once, amused. "She will someday," Vernon said seriously. "And when she does, I want her to know that her father has always loved her and always will, no matter what." Winter passed quietly and happily. Ruby recovered from childbirth and settled into motherhood, finding it both more challenging and more rewarding than she had expected. She missed teaching but knew she would return to it eventually when Victoria was older. For now, she was content to be home with her daughter, creating a family with Vernon. The town of Springerville had fully accepted them by now. People would stop by to visit the new baby, bringing gifts of food or hand-sewn baby clothes. Sarah Miller was a frequent visitor, delighted to have a baby to fuss over. Even Mrs. Harper stopped by once, holding Victoria with surprising gentleness, and commenting that Ruby had produced a fine, healthy child. In the spring of 1885, Vernon got news that changed everything. Mr. Erickson called him into the main house one day and offered him a new position, foreman of the Double Diamond Ranch. The current foreman was retiring, and Mr. Erickson wanted Vernon to take over. "It is a big responsibility," Mr. Erickson said. "You would be in charge of all the other hands, overseeing the daily operations, helping me make decisions about the herd and the land. But it also comes with better pay and a house on the ranch property, bigger than what you have now." Vernon was stunned. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will think about it and discuss it with your wife. This affects her too. Then give me your answer." Vernon came home that evening and told Ruby everything. She listened carefully, asking questions about the responsibilities, the pay, the house. "What do you want to do?" she asked finally. "I want to accept," Vernon admitted. "It is a huge opportunity, a chance to prove myself and build a real career. But it means moving to the ranch, which means you would be further from town. I know you want to go back to teaching eventually, and that might be harder if we are living at the ranch." Ruby thought about it seriously. The house they had now was comfortable, and she had friends in town, a life she had built. But she also saw the excitement in Vernon's eyes when he talked about the foreman position, saw the opportunity it represented for their family. "How far is the ranch from town?" "About an hour's ride by horse, longer by wagon. So I could still come to town for church and social events. And when Victoria is older and I want to go back to teaching, I could stay in town during the week and come home on weekends, at least during the school year." Vernon's face brightened. "That could work. We could make that work. Then I think you should accept the position." "This is an amazing opportunity, Vernon. We can make the rest work somehow." Vernon pulled her into his arms. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" "Not in the last hour," Ruby teased. "I was starting to feel neglected." They moved to the Double Diamond Ranch in June, settling into a comfortable adobe house with 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a covered porch that looked out over the ranch. It was the nicest place Ruby had ever lived, and she set about making it a home with enthusiasm. Vernon threw himself into his new responsibilities, working harder than ever but also with greater satisfaction. He was good at managing men, firm but fair, and the ranch hands respected him. Mr. Erickson told Vernon more than once that he had made the right choice in promoting him. Ruby adjusted to ranch life, finding her own place in the community of wives and families who lived on the property. She helped with cooking for the ranch hands during busy times like roundups, joined the other women for sewing circles and quilting bees, and watched as Victoria grew and thrived in the wide open spaces. She missed teaching, missed her students and the schoolhouse. But she knew she would return to it eventually. For now, she was focused on being a mother and a wife, on building a life with Vernon, on creating the kind of family she had always dreamed of having. In the fall of 1886, Ruby discovered she was pregnant again. This time she told Vernon by presenting him with a pair of tiny knitted booties at dinner. He picked them up, confused for a moment, then his eyes went wide. Another baby, probably spring." Vernon whooped with joy, pulling Ruby into a hug and spinning her around just like he had the first time. Victoria, now nearly 2 years old and toddling around the house, clapped her hands and laughed, not understanding but happy to see her parents happy. Their son was born in April of 1887, after another long but manageable labor. Vernon had wanted to stay with Ruby again, but this time there were complications that required the doctor's full attention, and he was asked to wait outside. It was the longest few hours of Vernon's life, pacing back and forth while Victoria was tended by Mrs. Erickson. When the doctor finally came out and told him he had a healthy son and that Ruby was fine, Vernon nearly collapsed with relief. They named the boy Vincent Robert Edwards, carrying on Vernon's name but with a different first name so there would be no confusion. Vincent was a serious baby from the start, with dark hair like his father and gray eyes that he seemed to have gotten from some distant relative. He was quieter than Victoria had been, more content to lie in his cradle and observe the world around him. With 2 children now, Ruby's days were full and busy. But she loved it, loved being a mother, loved watching her children grow and develop. Victoria was a bright, curious child who asked constant questions about everything. Vincent was more reserved but no less intelligent, taking everything in with his serious gray eyes. Vernon was an involved father, spending as much time as he could with his children despite his responsibilities as foreman. He would take Victoria riding with him around the ranch, letting her sit in front of him in the saddle. He would sit with Vincent in the evenings, talking to the baby just like he had with Victoria, telling him about the ranch and the horses and his hopes for his son's future. Time passed, as it does. The seasons turned, the children grew, and Ruby and Vernon's love deepened. They had good years and hard years, times of plenty and times of drought, moments of joy and moments of worry. But through it all, they had each other. In 1890, when Victoria was 6 and Vincent was 3, Ruby finally returned to teaching. The school board in Springerville had been after her for years to come back, saying that the substitute teachers they had hired were adequate but not exceptional. Ruby missed the work, missed the students, and now that both her children were old enough, she felt ready. She and Vernon worked out an arrangement. Ruby would teach in Springerville during the week, staying in their old house in town which they had been renting out but which was now available. On Friday afternoons, Vernon would ride to town, and they would all spend the weekends together at the ranch. It was not perfect, but it allowed Ruby to pursue the work she loved while still being a wife and mother. The arrangement worked better than either of them had hoped. Ruby threw herself back into teaching with renewed passion, bringing all the wisdom she had gained from motherhood into the classroom. Her students loved her, and even Mrs. Harper, who was getting on in years now, admitted that Ruby was the best teacher Springerville had ever had. Vernon managed the ranch efficiently and raised their children to be good, kind people. Victoria grew into a confident, intelligent girl who loved horses and dreamed of being a rancher like her father. Vincent was quieter but equally bright, showing an early aptitude for mathematics and a love of books like his mother. On weekends, they were a complete family again. Ruby and Vernon would take the children riding, or they would have picnics in the hills, or they would simply spend time together at the ranch house, talking and laughing and being together. Those weekends were precious to all of them, a reminder of what really mattered. The years rolled on. Victoria started school in Springerville, sometimes staying with Ruby during the week and sometimes riding in with neighboring families. Vincent followed a few years later, and Ruby had the joy of teaching her own children in her classroom. In 1895, when Ruby was 35 and Vernon was 37, they decided their family was complete. They had 2 healthy, wonderful children, a good life and each other. What more could they ask for? Mr. Erickson was getting older now, and he began talking to Vernon about eventually buying the ranch. "I have no children of my own," he said. "When I die, the ranch will go to whoever wants to buy it. I would rather it went to someone who loves it like I do, who will take care of it and the people who work here. You are that person, Vernon." It was a daunting prospect, owning a ranch the size of the Double Diamond, but Vernon and Ruby talked about it seriously, considering the possibilities. They had saved money over the years, living frugally and investing wisely. With a loan from the bank and their savings, they might be able to do it. In 1898, they finalized the purchase. Mr. Erickson stayed on to help with the transition, and he and Mrs. Erickson moved into a smaller house on the property to enjoy their retirement. Vernon and Ruby Edwards were now the owners of the Double Diamond Ranch. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. But they had faced challenges before and overcome them. They would do so again. Victoria, now 14, was already helping with the ranch work, showing a natural talent for handling cattle and horses. Vincent, at 11, was more interested in the business side of things, keeping careful records of the herd and expenses with a precision that impressed his father. Ruby continued teaching, now with the financial security of knowing that if the ranch failed, they would still have her income. But the ranch did not fail. Under Vernon's management as owner rather than just foreman, it thrived. He made smart decisions about breeding and land use, treated his workers fairly, and built a reputation as an honest, reliable rancher. The 20th century arrived, bringing with it changes to the West. The wild frontier days were fading into memory, replaced by towns and railroads and the march of civilization. But some things remained constant: the land, the work, the importance of family and community. Ruby finally retired from teaching in 1905 at the age of 45. She had taught for over 20 years, influencing hundreds of students, many of whom went on to successful lives and careers. The school board threw her a retirement party, and former students came from all over to thank her for everything she had taught them. "You changed my life," more than one told her, and Ruby would smile and say that they had changed hers too. With more time at the ranch now, Ruby was able to focus on other interests. She started a lending library for the ranch families, collecting books and loaning them out. She helped Mrs. Erickson, now quite elderly, with her garden. She spent time with her children, who were growing into remarkable young adults. Victoria, at 20, was already engaged to a young rancher from a neighboring property, a good man named Daniel who reminded Ruby of a young Vernon. They married in 1906, and Ruby cried through the entire ceremony, remembering her own wedding 22 years earlier. Vincent went away to college in Santa Fe to study business, but he promised to return and help his father run the ranch. He kept that promise, coming home in 1909 with a degree and a quiet young woman named Ellen, who he had met at school and who became his wife that same year. Ruby and Vernon became grandparents in 1907, when Victoria had her first child, a little boy named after Vernon. More grandchildren followed over the years. Victoria had 4 children total, and Vincent and Ellen had 3. The ranch house was often filled with the noise and laughter of grandchildren, and Ruby thought she had never been happier. Vernon aged well, his hair going silver at the temples but his body remaining strong from years of hard work. Ruby herself carried a few more pounds than she had in her youth, but Vernon would still pull her into his arms and tell her she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "Even after all these years?" Ruby would ask, laughing. "Especially after all these years," Vernon would reply seriously. "Because now I know everything about you, all the layers and depths, and you are even more beautiful to me now than you were the day I met you." On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1909, Vernon surprised Ruby with a trip. They left the ranch in Vincent's capable hands and took the train to San Francisco, something Ruby had dreamed of doing for years. They spent 2 weeks exploring the city, seeing the sights, eating at restaurants, and simply enjoying each other's company without the daily responsibilities of the ranch. "Thank you," Ruby said one evening as they walked along the beach, watching the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. "For everything, for stopping that day on the trail, for seeing me when no one else did, for loving me all these years." "Thank you for saying yes," Vernon replied, taking her hand, "for trusting me enough to climb on that horse, for building this life with me, for being my partner in everything." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. They returned to the ranch refreshed and ready to face whatever came next. The years continued to pass, each bringing its own joys and challenges. They watched their grandchildren grow, helped their children navigate the complexities of life and ranching, and continued to work side by side in building the life they had always wanted. In 1915, They celebrated their 31st anniversary quietly at the ranch, surrounded by family. Victoria was there with her 4 children, Vincent and Ellen with their 3. Mr. and Mrs. Erickson, now quite elderly but still sharp, came to dinner and toasted the couple who had become like children to them. "You two give me hope," Sarah Miller said. She had never married, but had remained Ruby's close friend all these years, now living in Springerville and still giving music lessons. "You prove that true love exists, that it is possible to find someone who sees you for who you really are." "It exists," Ruby said firmly. "Sometimes in the most unexpected places and circumstances. You just have to be open to it when it appears." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Ruby and Vernon sat on their porch looking at the stars, just like they had done so many times over the years. "You ever think about that day?" Ruby asked. "The day the stagecoach left me, sometimes," Vernon admitted. "I think about how easily I might have ridden past without stopping. I almost did, you know. I thought it was not my business, that you probably had things handled. What made you stop? I do not know exactly. Something about the way you were standing there, so alone but so determined not to show it. I just knew I could not leave you there. It would have haunted me forever." "I am glad you stopped. That moment changed my entire life." "It changed mine too," Vernon said softly. "That was the day I met my wife, my partner, the mother of my children, my best friend. The day I stopped just existing and started really living." Ruby leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of the man she loved, the man who had ridden back for her when everyone else left her behind. "I love you, Vernon Edwards." "I love you too, Ruby Edwards. Always have, always will." They sat there in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, surrounded by the land they had worked together to build into something meaningful. Around them in the house, their family slept. Children and grandchildren, a legacy of love and hard work and second chances. Ruby thought about the young woman she had been, standing alone on a dusty trail with a broken heart and shattered dignity. That woman had been so lost, so unsure of her place in the world. And then Vernon had appeared, offering not pity but partnership, not charity but genuine care. Their story had not been easy. They had faced challenges and setbacks, moments of doubt and difficulty. But they had faced them together, and that had made all the difference. Now, past 50 and looking at the rest of their lives stretching ahead of them, Ruby felt nothing but gratitude. She had a husband who loved her truly and completely. She had children who were good people making their own way in the world. She had grandchildren who filled her days with joy. She had work she had loved and a home she had built with her own hands and heart. Most importantly, she had learned that true value came not from how you looked or how much you weighed, or whether you fit society's narrow definitions of acceptable. True value came from the content of your character, from the love you gave and received, from the life you built, and the people you touched along the way. Vernon had seen that in her from the very beginning. And in seeing it, in believing in her when she barely believed in herself, he had given her the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to become who she was always meant to be. The night grew late, and eventually they went inside, hand in hand, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring. Because they would face it together, just like they had faced everything else for over 3 decades. And in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, as Ruby settled into Vernon's arms like she had done thousands of times before, she whispered a prayer of thanks for the cowboy who had ridden back, who had said, "Climb on," and who had given her not just a ride to safety but a journey to a life beyond her wildest dreams. Their story was one of love and second chances, of seeing past surface appearances to the truth beneath, of 2 people finding each other against impossible odds and building something beautiful together. It was a story that would be told and retold in the family for generations. The tale of how Grandma Ruby was left behind by a stagecoach, and how Grandpa Vernon rode back and changed both their lives forever. And as Ruby drifted off to sleep, secure in the arms of the man she loved, she knew that every hardship, every moment of pain, every instance of being made to feel less than she was had been worth it. Because all of it had led her to this, to Vernon, to their children, to the life they had built together on the New Mexico plains. The stagecoach had left her behind, but Vernon had come back, and in doing so, he had not just saved her life. He had given her a reason to live it fully, completely, and with more love than she had ever imagined possible. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.